She opened the gold envelope with trembling fingers. No name, no sender, just a location, time, and the words, "You're the guest of honor." Tolu hesitated. Just a few years ago, she had scrubbed floors and sold roasted maize to survive. Who would invite her to a luxury hotel she could never afford? Curiosity won. But nothing could prepare her for what happened at that dinner, when the curtains pulled back and a powerful figure walked toward her, knelt, and crowned her, in front of everyone. And all because of something she had long forgotten, an act of kindness that changed someone's life forever. Tolu was a young woman from a Bayo village, full of dreams but buried in struggles. Life had never been easy for her. Every day she woke up before the sun to prepare grilled corn, which she sold by the roadside. Her hands were always rough and tired from the work, and the smell of smoke followed her everywhere. She also cleaned people's houses, scrubbing floors, and washing clothes just to earn a little money. She didn't complain, because all she cared about was taking care of her sick grandmother, the only family she had left. They lived in a small, broken house with a leaking roof, and sometimes they barely had enough to eat. Tolu's biggest dream was to go to school, wear a uniform, and learn like other girls her age. But with so many bills to pay and medicine to buy, that dream stayed locked in her heart. Still, she kept working, day after day, with a quiet strength that made people wonder how she kept going. Many looked down on her, but Tolu never let shame stop her. She believed that one day, something good would happen, even if she didn't know when or how. One cold and rainy evening, Tolu was packing up her roasted corn stall when the clouds broke open and heavy rain began to fall. She quickly ran to the small shelter nearby with her basket. As she waited for the storm to calm, she saw a small boy standing in the rain. He looked no older than 10. His clothes were soaked, and his tiny body shivered from the cold. People walked past him, but no one stopped. Tolu watched him for a while, feeling something deep in her heart. She couldn't just leave him there. Without thinking twice, she waved at him and called him over. Come here," she said softly. The boy looked unsure at first, but slowly walked toward her. Tolu made space under the shelter and gave him a small wrapper to dry himself. She didn't ask his name or why he was alone in the rain. She just gave him a warm piece of corn and a bottle of water. The boy sat quietly beside her, eating slowly. He didn't speak much, but his eyes said everything. They were full of sadness, pain, and something else. Fear, maybe. Tolu didn't press him for details. She just sat with him, sharing the little she had, trying to make him feel safe. After a while, the rain slowed down. Tolu stood up and asked him where he needed to go. The boy whispered the name of a bus stop far away. Tolu didn't have much money, but she walked him halfway and gave him her last cash for transport. "Be careful, okay?" she said as he stepped onto the bus. The boy looked back at her one last time, eyes wide and filled with something she couldn't explain, maybe gratitude. Then the bus pulled away and she never saw him again. Years passed, and Tolu's life was still hard, but she never gave up. She now worked in a noisy garment factory, sewing clothes from morning till night. The pay was small, but it helped her buy food and medicine for her grandmother. Every day was the same: sweat, noise, and tired hands. She still dreamed of a better life, but she had learned not to expect too much. Then one afternoon, something strange happened. A delivery man walked into the factory, asking for someone named Tolu. Confused, she raised her hand. He handed her a shiny golden envelope and left without saying a word. Tolu looked at the envelope carefully. It had no name of the sender, just her name on the front in bold letters. Her heart began to beat fast. She opened it slowly, and inside was a beautiful card with silver writing. It was an invitation to a luxury dinner at a place called Lagos Grand Royale. The note simply said, "You are the guest of honor. Come as you are." Tolu couldn't believe her eyes. Lagos Grand Royale was a hotel only rich people went to. She had seen it once on TV: crystal lights, red carpets, people in big cars. What would someone like her be doing there? She showed it to her co-workers, hoping they could explain, but they just laughed. "Maybe it's a mistake," one said. "Or a joke," another added. Some even said it might be a scam. Tolu didn't know what to think. The card looked real, but she was scared. What if it really was a prank to make fun of her? Still, something inside her said this was different. Something told her she had to go. Even if it made no sense, even if people laughed, She had to find out why someone would invite a poor factory worker to such a place. So, with a nervous heart and shaking hands, she decided she would go. The night of the dinner finally arrived. Tolu stood in front of her small mirror, wearing the only decent gown she owned, a simple, faded pink dress she had once worn to church. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and neat. She had brushed her hair and borrowed a pair of sandals from a kind neighbor. Her hands shook as she stepped outside to find transport. The entire ride to Lagos Grand Royal, her heart raced. Doubts kept filling her mind. What if it was all a mistake? What if they laughed at her? When she arrived, the large gates of the hotel opened and her breath caught in her chest. The building stood tall like a palace, glowing with golden lights. People stepped out of sleek cars, dressed in suits and gowns that sparkled. Tolu walked in slowly, trying not to stare too much. The doorman opened the glass door and smiled politely. She gave her name at the front desk, half expecting them to say she wasn't on the list. But to her surprise, the woman smiled brightly and said, "Welcome, Miss Tolu. We've been waiting for you." Tolu's heart jumped. Waiting for her. She looked around, confused. She was guided to a grand ballroom known as the Diamond Room. The doors opened, and she stepped inside. Her eyes widened. The hall looked like something from a dream. Giant crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, glowing softly. White silk curtains danced gently in the breeze. The air smelled of sweet flowers and fine perfume. Golden plates sat on polished tables. People in tuxedos and sparkling gowns stood around chatting. But as Tolu entered, the room fell quiet for a moment. All eyes turned to her. She felt small and unsure. She held her dress tightly and lowered her head. But then, something strange happened. Instead of laughing or ignoring her, people began to smile and nod. Some even clapped lightly. An elegant man in a black suit walked toward her. "Miss Tolu," he said warmly, "we're so honored to have you tonight." She blinked in confusion. "Please come with me." He led her past the guests, straight to the center of the room, where a beautiful table had been set just for her. Her name was written on a golden card. Everyone around looked pleased to see her there, as if they knew her story. Tolu sat down slowly, her heart beating loudly. She had no idea why she was being treated this way. But one thing was sure, this night was no mistake. Tolu sat at the beautiful center table, still unsure why she was even there. Her eyes moved around the diamond room, taking in the soft lights, the sound of gentle music, and the sparkle of expensive jewelry and dresses. She picked at the edge of her napkin, trying not to feel out of place. Waiters served her with so much respect, pouring wine she didn't drink, and offering dishes she had never seen before. She smiled politely and nodded, but deep inside, her heart was full of questions. Why was she invited? Who brought her here? And why did it seem like everyone already knew her? As time passed, the whispers began. They were soft at first, but she noticed them. People at nearby tables leaned in, whispering to one another while glancing her way. Some looked shocked, others looked curious. A few had warm smiles, but it only made Tolu more nervous. She wasn't used to attention. She was just a girl from a small village who used to sell roasted corn by the roadside. What could she have possibly done to be treated like a special guest in a place like this? She saw important people, men in suits, women in elegant gowns, even people she had once seen on the news, looking at her with respect in their eyes. One man whispered something to a woman beside him, and the woman turned to Tolu with a soft nod and a kind smile. Another guest looked surprised, then clapped quietly to himself before sipping his drink. Tolu sat frozen, trying not to panic. She didn't understand what was going on. She wanted to ask, but everyone around her looked so calm, like they were waiting for something or someone. At one point, a young woman walked past her table and said gently, "You're very lucky," before disappearing into the crowd. Lucky? For what? Tolu's hands were starting to sweat. She felt like a fish out of water. She thought of her grandmother back home, of the small house they lived in, of the nights they slept without food. What if this was all a mistake? What if they confused her for someone else? But every time she looked around, people smiled and nodded, as if they were all in on a secret that she wasn't told. No one laughed, no one mocked. They just waited. Tolu sat still, her eyes wide, her heart racing. Something big was happening. She didn't know what, but she could feel it in the air. Something was coming, something life-changing. Suddenly, The lights in the grand room slowly began to dim. Conversations stopped. The music faded. A quiet hush fell over the guests. Tolu looked around, confused and a little scared. What was going on? Why did the lights go out? Then, a large projector screen started rolling down from the ceiling, right in front of the stage. All eyes turned to it. Tolu sat frozen in her chair, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. Something big was about to happen. She could feel it. The screen flickered to life, and a video began to play. The room was silent, with everyone focused on the screen. At first, it showed a rainy street, a blurry image of a young boy walking alone in the dark. Then came a voice, calm, deep, and full of emotion. "She didn't know who I was," the voice said. "She didn't ask for anything, but she gave me food. She gave me shelter. She gave me hope when I had no one." Tolu gasped softly. That voice, it sounded familiar, but older. The video continued, showing pictures of a young boy sitting by a fire, wrapped in a warm shawl, eating roasted corn. Tolu's heart stopped. That was her shawl. That was her corn. And that was the boy. The same boy she helped years ago during a stormy night. She remembered his eyes, sad, lost, wet from the rain. She had fed him and walked him to the bus stop without asking for anything in return. Then he disappeared. She had never seen him again, until now. The camera zoomed out, and the boy's face appeared, now older, confident, and well-dressed. The voice continued. "That day changed my life. Her kindness was a seed that helped me grow. I never forgot her." The lights slowly came back on, and everyone in the room turned their heads toward the stage. And then he walked in. The boy from that rainy night, now a grown man, handsome, powerful, and wearing a sharp suit, stepped onto the stage. He smiled gently as his eyes met Tolu's. The room let out a collective gasp. Tolu could barely breathe. Her hands covered her mouth in shock. He was no ordinary man now. He was someone important, someone everyone in that room seemed to respect, and he had come for her. The room was silent as the young man stood on the stage. His presence was powerful, but his eyes were soft, full of emotion. He held the microphone gently and looked around at the guests before speaking. "My name," he began, "is Kayin Adoroju." A murmur spread through the crowd. That name was known all over the world. Kayin Adoroju, the tech billionaire who built one of the biggest companies in Africa, a man featured in magazines, news, and global events. People looked at him with shock and respect, but Tolu could only stare, still frozen in disbelief. That little boy had become this. Kayin smiled and turned toward her. He slowly stepped down from the stage and walked to where she sat, her hands still trembling. He stopped in front of her and said in a calm but strong voice, "You saved me when I had nothing. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything, but you gave me warmth, food, and care, like I was your own brother." That moment changed my life forever. The guests watched with wide eyes, some wiping away tears. Kayin took a deep breath, then continued, "Tonight, the world will finally see you for what you truly are. Not just a kind woman, not just a hard worker, but a queen in spirit." Suddenly, an assistant stepped forward, holding a beautiful golden headpiece. It sparkled under the lights, shaped like a crown but soft and elegant. Kayin took the crown gently in his hands, knelt before Tolu, and placed it on her head with care. "This crown," he said, "is not for royalty by blood. It is for royalty by heart. And Tolu, you are the most noble woman I've ever met." The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping loudly. Some even cheered. Tolu's eyes filled with tears as she touched the crown on her head. It felt like a dream. Her heart, once full of struggles, now overflowed with joy. She had no fancy education, no riches, no fame, but her simple act of kindness had returned to her like a wave of blessing. And now, the whole world was watching and honoring her. The clapping grew louder and louder. People were standing, clapping with so much joy and respect. Some even had tears in their eyes. Tolu sat there, shocked and speechless. She had never imagined a moment like this in her life. Just a few weeks ago, she was waking up at 4 a.m. to walk to the garment factory, coming back tired and counting every coin to care for her sick grandmother. Now, she was sitting in the middle of the most expensive hall in Lagos, wearing a golden crown, while the world clapped for her. Kayin stepped forward again and raised his hand. The room became quiet. "This is just the beginning," he said with a smile. Because of Tolu's pure heart, I have decided to launch the Tolu Adaroju Foundation, a charity that will help young people across Nigeria who are struggling just like she was. The foundation will build schools, fund education, and provide food and shelter for children in need. Gasps and cheers filled the room again. But Kayan wasn't done. He looked at Tolu and said, "Tolu, you are more than just an inspiration. You are a symbol of hope. And from today, I am appointing you as the goodwill ambassador of my global initiative, Hearts in Hands. You will travel, speak, and help change the lives of thousands." Tolu's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her heart was beating fast. Was this real? The girl who once sold corn by the roadside was now going to represent a global organization. She looked at Kayan, her eyes full of tears, and whispered, "Thank you." "No," he replied softly, "thank you. You reminded me what kindness means." From that moment, everything changed. The girl who once lived in the shadows of hardship now stood in the light of purpose. No more empty stomachs, no more torn shoes, no more hiding. Her name was now known, her story shared, and her heart honored. Tolu's life had been rewritten, not by luck, not by magic, but by the quiet power of kindness. Back in the small village of Abayo, news spread like wildfire. People gathered in small groups, watching the video of the big event on their phones. The same people who once walked past Tolu without greeting her, the same ones who whispered about her poor clothes or laughed when she sold corn by the roadside. Now their mouths were open in shock. Some cried, some gasped, some simply covered their faces in shame. Her former boss at the garment factory, the one who once shouted at her for being a few minutes late, posted on social media, "I always knew Tolu had greatness in her, but everyone knew it was a lie. She never treated Tolu with respect. In fact, she often gave her the dirtiest jobs." Even distant relatives who had once refused to help Tolu or her grandmother suddenly began posting her pictures, calling her "our daughter," "our pride," and "a light from Abayo." One aunt even told a journalist, "I used to bathe her as a baby. I always told her she would be great." Neighbors who had once told their children not to play with her were now tagging her in every post, writing things like, "A queen came from our village." One old man even went on a local radio station to say, "Tolu used to greet me every morning. She was always respectful. I knew she was special." But the truth was, most of them had ignored her or looked down on her because she was poor. But Tolu didn't reply to any of them. She didn't post long messages or clap back at anyone. She simply stayed quiet, focusing on her new work and helping others. She moved with grace. No pride, no revenge, just peace. When asked in an interview about the sudden love from her past, she smiled and said, "I'm happy if they are proud, but I didn't do it for attention. I just did what felt right." Her words touched millions. People admired her even more, not just because of her success, but because of her heart. Tolu chose humility when she could have chosen revenge, and that made her story even more powerful. Tolu didn't let the bright lights change who she was. Even with fame and wealth now at her fingertips, her heart stayed the same, soft, giving, and full of purpose. She looked at the world and saw people like she once was, struggling, unheard, and forgotten. And instead of building tall walls around her success, she opened the gates wide. She started by building a school in Abayo, her home village. The same dusty streets where she once walked barefoot now had smiling children in uniforms, carrying books and dreaming big. She built a shelter for women who had nowhere to go, women who had been pushed aside, just like she once was. She gave small grants to women selling tomatoes, groundnuts, and handmade clothes, helping them grow their businesses and believe in themselves again. People from different countries invited her to speak, but she never used fancy words. She spoke in simple, honest language that touched hearts. She always said, "Kindness is never wasted. A small good deed can grow into something big, bigger than we can imagine." Tolu created a foundation that helped young girls go to school, even when their families couldn't afford it. She called it Seeds of Light. Every girl who received help was given a small golden pin in the shape of a crown, not because they were rich, but because they had worth, just like she did, even when no one saw it. In every crown she gave, there was a piece of her story, a story about a girl who had nothing but gave everything, a girl who helped a boy in the rain and planted a seed without knowing it. That seed grew into something powerful, not just for her, but for the world. Tolu's legacy wasn't in money or fame, It was in light, light that reached corners no one looked at, and in every life she touched, her silent seed continued to bloom. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll, share it. Let the world see how one act of kindness can change everything. Tag someone who needs this reminder. Your small good deed could be someone's big breakthrough. Comment light if you believe kindness still wins.